Thank you, Mr. President. We carefully listened to the information provided by Mr. Ebel. Dear colleagues, 2 days ago, Western delegations gathered the members of the Security Council here for their ritual monthly briefing on Ukraine. But the aim, apart from just ticking a box as to why they did this, is a mystery to all of us. Because, frankly, nothing apart from just having anti-Russian tropes and fakes has occurred. And from the statements of our Western colleagues, we were able to conclude that they basically gathered the members of the Security Council together to draw attention to the 33rd anniversary of the Day of Independence of Ukraine. So, in order to keep afloat Ukraine as a topic in the Security Council, much valuable time was wasted, and the Council could have spent that time on many more important subjects of concern to the international community. Furthermore, the fact that the Security Council chamber saw once again speakers under Rule 37, and namely the EU delegations who just repeat themselves, added absolutely no added value whatsoever and just wasted precious time. In this regard, we'd like to remind you that our Western colleagues in March used all their efforts to block a requested by Russia meeting of the 25th anniversary of the NATO aggression against Yugoslavia. So, as you recall, and in particular, the French PR was impassioned about this. They stated that the Council would not commemorate any anniversary, but so we hadn't asked for anything, but all we wanted to do was to recall that the impact of the NATO aggression in the Balkans is still being felt by the inhabitants of the entire Balkans, and they are in no way safer now. So we have encountered once again with egregious double standards from our Western colleagues who seem to be using this as their calling card. I am sure that they're going to bat around this calling card today as well, because they're going to say that today's meeting is a waste of time. But the fact is that it is actually dedicated to a very important topical issue, the Western supply of arms to the Kiev regime, and this being a factor preventing the peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. Distinguished colleagues, we're all aware that the main phase of the Ukrainian crisis started 2.5 years ago, and Russia had to start its SMO to protect the inhabitants of Donbass and to eradicate the threat from Ukraine. Today, it is perfectly clear that this phase would not have started if our former Western partners had not supplied Ukraine with weapons and prepared it for conflict with Russia, hiding behind the Minsk agreements in doing so that was approved by the Security Council of the UN in Resolution 2202 in 2015. So, indeed, the Ukrainian crisis would not exist if Washington and its allies had not brought to power in 2014, as a result of an anti-constitutional coup, radical national and Nazi opposition that focused on eradicating everything from our country that links it to Russia, our shared culture, language, and our shared history. As a result, the Kiev regime in the same year started a war against population in the east and the southeast that we came to stop in February 2022. Thus, the destructive role of the West in this ongoing Ukrainian tragedy is clear. The Ukrainian leadership, as we're all well aware, had an excellent chance to find a way out of this vicious, terrible cycle just a month after the beginning of the SMO. Then in Istanbul, there were initial documents that were very beneficial for that country. A necessary bilateral document. However, a number of Western leaders, and in particular the former British PM Boris Johnson, made sure that President Zelensky would reject this agreement because, with the assistance of Western weapons, he could inflict a defeat upon Russia and get the country's borders back to 1991. The reasons for this is absolutely clear. It was not for nothing that they spent so much effort in making Ukraine into an anti-Russian entity that would be able to weaken our country and let's reconcile these brotherly Slavic nations. This warped logic of the former colonizers acting as part of the divide and rule concept is something that our African and Asian colleagues truly recall. What on earth the Ukrainians were thinking about at that time is hard to say. As a result, there was the senseless pumping to Ukraine of Western weapons. There was old Soviet stuff that had to be used in any case. But then the Kiev regime got fairly modern Western equipment, tanks, APCs, artillery equipment, MLLSs, and the most important, ammunition and long-range missiles. According to the data on the internet, in February 2024, the overall volume of Western assistance to Ukraine was 243 billion euros. And since then, data on military assistance to Ukraine from Western countries has been hidden. But as of the end of 2020, the overall volume of military assistance from NATO countries was 98 billion euros, the EU 27 billion euros. So 125 billion euros in total, and that is more than half of all the resources allocated to Ukraine. As we all recall, in the first half of 2024, the US, with much wailing, nevertheless allocated a new package of military assistance to the Kyiv regime to the tune of $61 billion. Given the smaller deliveries from other NATO countries, we can say confidently that in 2024, the overall volume of military assistance from the West to the Zelensky regime was 200 billion euros. So I'm talking in such detail about this so that our colleagues from the Global South really understand this figure. We have said that the overall requirements of all humanitarian agencies in 2023 was $56.7 billion. And so that is 4 times less. And it was financed at 38.3%. Now, I'm not even talking about the fact that the US, as the biggest contributor to the UN budget, still cannot pay a paltry amount in comparison, just $1 billion to our organization that's causing the liquidity crisis in our organization. It's clear that assistance to Ukraine, and military assistance in particular, is a source of revenue for Western weapons manufacturers. American leaders themselves convinced Congress to approve the latest package, and this saying that this is a beneficial business program and this would create more jobs in the US. As regards the Kiev regime itself, well, it as a minimum, after the failed counter-offensive in 2023, used up its ammunition completely and weapons completely. And so now it's completely dependent on Western supplies. But they're still coming, although Ukraine for the West is a sort of suitcase without handles now, really. But the US and its satellites are still not prepared to give it up. So let's come to the main conclusion here. Without Western supplies of arms to Ukraine, they would have stopped fighting a long time ago. And that is something that Western politicians, including Mr. Borrell from his Garden of Flowers, admitted. The aim of the SMO was not to destroy Ukraine as a state. So the pointless meat grinder would have stopped. And this is something that the Ukrainian president is hanging on to because of his own geopolitical interests. And so tens of thousands of his own citizens wouldn't have gone into it and wouldn't have been sent to hundreds of thousands of his own citizens would not have been sent there. And they're desperately trying to avoid being sent to the front. Now, regarding the fact that the Ukrainians don't want to fight, well, that's absolutely clear. We can see that from the Ukrainian news. Men are hauled off the streets and sent to the front, practically without any training, to certain death. So it's absolutely not astonishing that desertion in the Ukrainian army has got to unimagined scale. Since the beginning of the SMO in Ukraine, more than 63,000 cases were started on this in the first 6 months of 2024 alone. According to the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine, there were about 30,000 cases started. This is twice as many as in 2020. Experts believe that the real statistic is actually 2 to 3 times higher. So, colleagues, make no mistake. The bloody Ukrainian head honcho can make his people fight only through force and coercion, and only thanks to the supplies of Western weapons, Western intelligence, Western instructors and mercenaries. That is why the topic of today's meeting is so important and pertinent. Mr. President, today we undoubtedly will hear from our Western colleagues the hackneyed statements about the determination of them to support Ukraine as long as they need, because apparently it's fighting for its survival and it's a victim of aggression. But in August, the head of the Ukrainian junta made a fatal mistake by pushing his forces over the border into a peaceful Russian region. The world, as I said 2 days ago, saw the pictures of the Ukrainian murderers with Nazi symbols looting and marauding, taking hostages and firing at women, children and old persons. This was so far from the image of the innocent victim of aggression that the US and its satellites have sought so hard to paint Ukraine as, that it means that now they're seeking to slightly disown Zelensky. But the facts speak for themselves. You, ladies and gentlemen, are entangled in this foray. Without your assistance, without your Western weapons, the Ukrainian head honcho would not have been able to do this. The director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency of the US, Frank Whitworth, on the 28th of August, confessed that the Ukrainian army is using satellite images supplied by them in the attack in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian army, as you recall, can't do much itself, so the Kursk foray to great extent took place thanks to the use of Western mercenaries. And they're not even hiding this fact. This is directly announced on the Forward Observation Group, a PMC from the US. Incidentally, there are photos of the military positions of mortars, and they have been located on a children's playground. So it's really obvious to our Western colleagues, there are obviously these gross violations of IHL, and this is something they recently travelled to Geneva to discuss. In order to achieve its aims, our Western hypocrites there's nothing that they don't stoop to. On the 12th of August, a repair unit of Rossete was fired at with chemical weapons. That is something that is characteristic for the US Army and that of Germany. Chemical weapons strikes were also born on Russian areas on the 21st of August. In the Kursk region, a part of the 74th radiochemical unit of the Ukrainian army was redeployed. And this is coming with the oversight of Washington, London and Brussels. There are manuals that we found where Ukrainian army soldiers are trained to use chemical ammunition with the use of artillery systems. Furthermore, Kyiv got about 500 tons of tritalamine that is used to for the chemical component of this. I'd like to remind you here that Western moralists have already sent highly enriched uranium and cluster munitions to Ukraine. Incidentally, there was information recently that the US is sending cluster munitions to Ukraine. This is taking place through Germany. They're kept there in Mizau. Publicly, Germany is against the transfer of such ammunition to Kyiv, and it is a participant to the international treaty that bans the use of that weapon. Distinguished colleagues, the Kursk foray of Zelensky, something I talked about in great detail 2 days ago. I'm not going to go into details now. There are Abrams, Leopards, HIMARS, ATAMs. The Russian, and then the Donbass region is being bombed and shelled. Yesterday, there was the Ukraine lost its first F-16 that was supplied to it. So what exactly is left of the Kiev regime that is facing utter collapse? Just one thing: having a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO, headed up by the US. Kiev just doesn't have another plan B. For this, the easiest thing is to create a huge provocation like Bucha and accuse Russia of it. We warned about this a few days ago, that the Kiev regime is planning for a provocation of a dirty nuclear bomb. But this is very complex, and carrying it out without Western backers is extremely difficult. So there's another option. So get permission for strikes far into Russian territory by using Western missiles. Washington and most other capitals have stopped at that at the moment. They do understand that this would lead to an enormous escalation that would go far beyond the borders of just Ukraine. And with all the nuclear power implications that would have. But Zelensky is kind of, the US is being visited by the head of the presidential Ukrainian office, Andrei Yermak, and Rustem Ermov, who is conducting meetings with representatives of the US administration to try and convince them to lift restrictions on long-range strikes using American weapons into Russian territory. Colleagues, this is what the right now looks like. The Ukrainian head honcho has focused on escalation by attacking Kursk. So there's a question: is he going to win thanks to the Ukrainian suitcase without handles, so to speak, and its allies and the US? So much is going to depend here on the countries of the global south that are talking that the world is trying to deceive. But we'd like to believe that we will hear your assessments and views on this today in this chamber. Distinguished colleagues, in conclusion, I'd like to draw your attention to another topic linked to Ukraine. On the 20th of August, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine adopted a law having any religious communities in Ukraine being affiliated with any religious organization in Russia to be taken to court. The court would suffice just having a religious expert opinion that could be easily falsified, and that would lead to a case. The document obviously is against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Its aim is to eliminate it and all of its congregation, or force it to join other religious organizations. Hundreds of monasteries, millions of Orthodox believers in Ukraine risk losing their legal rights and even losing their property and place of worship. The law is not in line with the Constitution of Ukraine or the rule of law. In essence, it is a political declaration that seeks to legalize the destruction of religious communities of the majority. This is an unprecedented anti-democratic decision, and even the Pope condemned it, who has not particularly been pro-Russian. The law allocates criteria allowing a group of people who are part of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but basically it's a form of political repression. And this is accompanied by egregious attacks on believers, threats, blackmail, violence, and beatings. There have been hundreds of criminal cases opened, but they were all on for political grounds. and people have been arrested, detained. A number of pastors and other higher-ups in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We talked about this repeatedly in the Security Council chamber. It did help stop the repression a bit, but an absence of due response to this from the West has made it difficult and made that the Ukrainians can continue. We have no doubt that stopping this terrible events in Ukraine and causing yet another confrontation in the country is the moral duty of each person, irrespective of that person's faith. It's important for somebody to believe just in something. The heads of the Kiev regime clearly don't want this. And there's this terrible Russophobia, and they are whipping this up time after time. We trust that in these circumstances, all of our colleagues who in their hearts and minds have some kind of faith will take a principled position and say no to this. Thank you very much.